Hello and welcome back. Now today's story is going to carry a darker tone than usual. Most of the criminal figures I have covered, including in my shorts, are old-fashioned American gangsters that are sometimes easy to romanticize. But today, we won't be talking about any Robin Hood-like figures. Today, we will dive deep down the hole of a true monster. See, some people are born with no other ambition than to be a sadist. That description brings us to Glennon Edward Engleman. Engleman was a one-time military man turned dentist who soon unleashed his true calling as a scam artist, con man, and contract killer. At first glance, you'd look at this guy and think that he was at the cusp of having the world at his hands. He graduated dental school and tried his hands at entrepreneurship. He seemed like a man with positive ambition, but as we will soon find out, his ambition was driven by a soulless sense of greed, and regardless of the prices he may have required for his services, there was no fulfilling his ambition to hurt people. Engleman seemed like your typically successful, upper-middle-class American that had worked their way into a prominent work field. But as we know, he was a hitman too. Not the typical gangland hitter, who by their own accords usually are just following orders per se. No, this man was a serial killer, and he enjoyed taking people's lives. He just decided to do it for profit and call it a contract hit, but from what I can tell, he was only feeding his hunger for blood. Now let's get into the life of Glennon Edward Engleman, who was born on February 6th in 1927. He was raised in a normal family home. They weren't poor or hurting for any necessities. There were no signs during his younger years that he was a psychopath either. In school, he did well and got good grades, and that was before joining the Army Air Corps, which offered benefits under the GI Bill that he eventually used to pay for his dental school. Glennon Engleman also married Edna Ruth Ball in 1953. He attended Washington University in St. Louis, where he eventually graduated with a dental degree in 1954. Less than 2 years later, he divorced his then-wife Edna Ball and then married Ida G. Van Hest in 1956. But Edna, his first wife, and Engleman stayed in pretty close contact. From there, he found success as a dentist before then opening up a racing track with his niece-in-law's husband, Eric Frey. What Eric Frey unfortunately didn't know was that his wife Sandy Frey was bumping uglies with the deviant dentist Glennon Engleman behind his back. So yes, Glennon was having an affair with his niece by marriage, and though it's not incest, it still gives me a weird feeling to think about having a relationship with somebody in my family. But, I don't know, maybe that's just me, but I hope not. That's not the only horrible thing that Glennon did to Eric, but we'll get into that shortly. Now, let's get into his first known victim. Edna Ruth Ball had remarried since her first marriage to Glennon. Now she was married to a man named James Bullock. James was a hard-working man, and he had a job in the Missouri electric field. He was also a student, attempting to propel him and his wife into a more financially stable lifestyle. But that wasn't good enough for Edna Ruth, though, as she had decided within the first few months of her second marriage that she wanted a large sum of money, and she decided the easiest way to get it was to have her husband James killed for the insurance payout. From there, Edna made it clear to Glennon that he would get a portion of the money if he killed James Bullock, and sadly enough, that all but sealed the fate of the unsuspecting but hard-working husband. And by the end of 1958, James Bullock's body was discovered with a fatal gunshot wound from a small-caliber handgun not far from the Art Museum in St. Louis. Glennon Engleman was now officially a contract killer. Aside from finding a new profession he was comfortable with, he believed that manipulating people into allowing him to kill their significant others for insurance money was a great motive. It was his cherry on top. He would get to feed his hunger for blood, and he would ultimately profit from it as well. In 1963, the dentist would strike again. Eric Frey, the husband of his then niece and lover, Sandy Frey, was working with Glenn Engleman on a construction project in relation to their racing track business. One day while on the site, Glennon assaulted Eric Frey with a rock before dumping his body into a well and dropping explosives down to cover his tracks and make it look like it was an accident, which in itself is just horrid and a shocking crime. Again, he was gifted a portion of the insurance payout from Sandy Frey, his lover. He used his money from Eric's death and invested it into the racing track. That wasn't enough though, because in 1964, Glennon had to file bankruptcy on the racing track and eventually went back to being a dentist full-time. Let's go about a decade down the road where in 1976, his childhood friend and one-time dental associate Miranda Holm eventually decided that it would be in her favor too for Glennon Engleman to take the life of her husband for an insurance payout, as Glennon was considered charming. He had a way of manipulating people, especially women. It's said he would manipulate these women into killing their spouses, but it's also hard for me to believe that they did this only due to his idea. You have to be a terrible person as is one way or another to be convinced to kill a spouse or any innocent person for that matter. So it was negotiated that Glennon would take out Miranda's husband, Peter, home. In a horrible setup, Miranda coerced her husband, Peter, to take her out to a pond around the city of Pacific, Missouri. While they were standing next to one another, Peter was shot once from behind with a rifle by Glennon, ending his life, next to the scoundrel that helped orchestrate his assassination, which is just cold. That's soulless. Glennon Engleman had an accomplice that day he executed Peter home with, and that man was named Robert Handy. By 1977, Glennon was having an affair with another married woman named Barbara Boyle, who was married to Ron Goosewell. Follow me on this one, okay? See, Barbara had found out that Ron's parents had an estate worth several $100,000 as they owned an oil business, which Ron would be the sole heir to. Barbara was greedy and she had to have it, so she conspired with Glennon and another man to have Ron's parents killed. In 1977, Glennon traveled up to the farmhouse that Vanita and Arthur Goosewell lived, which were Ron's parents, and he viciously took both of their lives. Again, I want to emphasize how disgustingly evil and greedy Barbara is, because after ordering the death of Ron's parents, she moved on to Ron and had him killed a year and a half later in East St. Louis because she found out his estate was also worth several $100,000 as well. For context, the police were aware of Glenn Engleman and believed he was a prime suspect, as it obviously wasn't a coincidence to law enforcement, as he was a consistently related piece that surrounded so many deaths. Finally, in 1980, the walls were creeping in on the devilish dentist, but not soon enough for the last but unfortunate victim, Sophia Barrera. Glennon Engleman had borrowed money from Sophia, who was also in the dental industry, but he failed to pay her back. With the non-payments piling up, Sophia was forced to sue Glennon, and sadly enough, he sought out his revenge by planting a car bomb in her vehicle, tragically taking another life. After the death of Sophia Barrera, one of Engleman's ex-wives, his third wife to be exact, approached law enforcement and helped bust the case open against the one-time dental student now turned insurance fraudster and hitman. Glennon Engleman was soon arrested, and by 1985, he was connected to multiple crimes which he was undoubtedly convicted for. Those crimes ranging from fraud charges to capital M-U-R-D-E-R. YouTube does not like the M-word, in case you've wondered why I dance around it so much. Sorry, I really am, but they don't like it. And finally, Glennon, the demonic dentist, was locked up, and so were all the accomplices he had orchestrated and committed so many heinous crimes with. One of the sentences he received was life without parole, which kept him caged like the animal he was until his death in March of 1999. He rotted in prison like the sugar-ridden teeth he was once so familiar with. And personally, I hope he suffered every single moment of his life in prison. The sad part about this story isn't the cliche potential he could have had as a normal, hard-working dental profession. It's the loss of life. Each one of his victims were honest, hard-working people. They weren't gangsters or criminals who made their own beds. They were innocent people living out their vision of the American dream, a dream that was fatefully derailed into a nightmare every time Glennon Engleman showed up. I hope the families of the victims found at minimum some peace with his convictions. If you have any feelings or input, I would love to hear it in the comments section down below, but please be respectful. Thank you for joining me again, this time after finding another reason to not enjoy the dental office. Please like, subscribe, come back soon, and most importantly, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.